breakfast. And does that seem like it's working?
No.
It doesn't, there we go. So first of all,
That's it now. Mine works.
all right. I am used to being very loud for 350 students in here, so I don't think it'll really be a problem. I would like to give you a warm welcome to joining us today. And really, it's a show of appreciation on being a part of something that we've been working really hard on. And it's great to see you at this time of year because with 3.5 weeks left of school, it's kind of a time also that year where you really realize how much your child has grown and learned in the year. And they've grown a lot, and they've learned a lot. And so it's a little bit of a celebration as well, to take a moment to think about how much your child's grown and learned. And I want to share with you that the middle school looks forward to continuing to help your child grow as a learner. And in an environment that has exceptionally high standards and values. There's so much of what we're doing that we know is just really excellent practice, and those things are going to continue. You received when you came in a set of sticky notes, and if you don't have sticky notes, please feel free to go over and see Alicia to get a few sticky notes. And that's to help you track your thinking during the session. We're going to give you a lot of information. We know it's a lot of information. And when we're going through the information, if you have questions, you can write them on the sticky notes so that you don't lose your thinking. And then also, we're going to do a little tracking your thinking questions activity at the end called Compass Points. This is going to help us continue to know how we need to support you and know what you have concerns about so that we can address those. And it will help us to be able to document that. If you see the whiteboards that are around the room right here, the small boards, the easels, they have those different points on them. And that's north over there and west over here. So those are at the front. But at the end, we're going to do that before we take some questions. And then additionally, we have a question and answer session on Friday for any parents who think they can make it to that session, because we know that there's a lot to take in, a lot to think about, and some good things that you might want to read and learn about in between and have just some time to think. So that's just something that I wanted to share with you. And also, we've heard quite a few parents already, and talked with them about concerns they have, and hopefully a lot of those questions will be addressed in this presentation. So I want to just start off before I introduce Stacy, that our work really has been a long and thoughtful process. And I wanted to share with you that it began about 2.5 years ago with a small group of faculty that went to Oman to listen to some experts and work with other international schools about what is standards-based grading reporting. We've been a standards-based school for a while. What does this reporting piece look like? And what they came back with is, wow, this is really our next steps. And they brought it back to both the administration and to the faculty at large. And there was great support for our movement. Now, each school, even though we're a K-12 school, is developmentally different. So what we're talking about today is the middle school. And Stacy will comment a little bit more about this, but we're not talking about what the high school is going to be doing in the future or not doing in the future. This is about what's right for middle school, and that's what our faculty has worked on this year. And some of these things that we've done have been implemented already, things that are really good practice, like a reassessment policy, and not thinking that just because your child wasn't successful in that assessment that the learning opportunity is done. So there's been things that we've already implemented about those things. So I want you to know we've taken our time, and we've tried to make this right for AES Middle School. And there are some schools out there that have moved to standards-based grading reporting and done it all in a year. So we've worked on this for about 2.5 years. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Stacy to talk to you about what we believe is the best fit for AES Middle School, and that's our move to standards-based grading reporting. And I think there's one more slide just to share with you our outcomes for today, is to build an understanding with you of what things will look like next year at AES, and understanding why schools are moving to this and the research that supports that. We want you to know that this is all our foundation in this is in data. And also an opportunity to communicate needs for further learning and support related to standards-based grading report. And now Stacy Stevens, our Director of Curriculum and Learning.
Hi, thank you for coming in this morning. As Beth knows, she's my timekeeper, and she'll stand over there and flash me numbers. It's kind of good that we have other things that happen in the hop, because it doesn't mean I have to finish at a certain point so that we can move on, because I'm sure that you can imagine, with the kind of work that we've been doing for the past 2.5 years, there's a lot to share. And we've shared things before, but I also know some people are new. You might not have been able to go before. Things start to seem a little bit more real when we say, this is going to happen next year. And so I'm really trying to strike a balance between kind of showing you what some things are going to look like next year, but also helping you understand the research and the rationale behind it. But in trying to strike that balance, I also really want to acknowledge that there's probably going to be some other more practical things that you want. And that's what these boards are for you to tell us, like, where do you need more learning? Where do you need more understanding? We're still in the midst of one of the things that we had to do that we did not anticipate having to do at the start of this process is we had to go find a new grade book. And some of those things were work, like as you do this, you're like, wow, Veracross said they could do this. Well, when it really came to doing it, we realized Veracross can't do this. So there's still some of these practical things that I was in a 2-hour standards meeting yesterday where they were just uploading all the standards into our new grade book. So there's still some things that we're really, up to our elbows in, and as we have more concrete pieces around those pieces, we will absolutely be sharing them with you, and they'll absolutely all be ready and in place for next year. So please know that we really are trying to strike a balance between the theoretical, the research, and the practical, but we definitely want to hear from you. What do you need as we go through this process? So our agenda today is really digging into some of the educational research that has really influenced our practices. This has been a very long journey for AES, though we may say that we've been looking at standards-based system in terms of grading and reporting for the past 2.5 years. In terms of our assessment practices and the learning and the research around our assessments practice, that's been going on for years. So a lot of what you see coming home already, and a lot of our practices are really steeped in a lot of the practices that you have to have in a standards-based grading and reporting system. And that's one of the reasons that we think this is the next logical step for us, is because this is the way we work, and so we want to report out in ways that are in line with the way we teach our children. We really want to talk about what's not changing at AES, because I think when you say you're going to change your report card, that sounds huge to people. This is a really big change, but there's a lot of really important things here that we do at AES that don't change at all. So we really want to make sure that we're really clear on what's not changing in the middle school, and then really introduce you to what looks different in a standards-based system. And then we really, as we said, we want to hear from you and get some feedback from you. And as Beth said, there will be 2 additional opportunities on Friday morning. There are 2 articles in your packet at the end about standards-based grading and reporting, an article on connecting grades and motivation. So on Friday morning, if you read those articles and you want to talk about those, I'll be in the middle school conference room for us to sort of chat about those articles. And then in the afternoon from 2:30 to 3:30 is going to be a question and answer period. Because one thing we know that we can't do today is probably have time to take everyone's questions. So we definitely want to give you additional opportunities to ask questions for what doesn't end up fitting into our time today. And then we'll talk about what are some of our next steps as we move forward. So this was actually the beginning, in many ways, of some of our standards-based work. It's really important to have some guiding beliefs and some guiding philosophies around this, because this is essentially a process of choice as you go through and you try and move into a standards-based grading and reporting system. Some of you may have come from other standards-based grading and reporting systems. Some of you will go on to other ones, and it's not like you go to the internet and there's one document that tells you this is what it looks like. Schools have to really go through a process and think about What do you believe as a school? What do you value as a school? And then what kind of practices are in line with that? And how is it that you communicate about those things? So you may see other schools that also say that they're standards-based, and it won't be identical to what we do here. But sort of the underpinning philosophy of it, they are the same. It's just the way they choose to turn around and communicate it out to parents may look a little different from school to school. So this was a very fundamental guiding piece for us that we've relied on and gone back to over and over again, is why are we making this change? What's the purpose in us changing our report card and our grade book? And for us, it really lies in these 2 bullet points, that we really want to reflect not only just a grade, but we want to show you how your child is doing in terms of their academic learning, and also how are they doing on their learning habits and their work habits. We value a lot of different things about kids. We value their academic achievement, but we also value whether they're responsible and respectful and collaborative. And so we really want to have a more basically complex reporting system, because learning is complex. Children are complex. And we want to move away from a system where we say that your child is a B in math. We want to give more information than that. And we also really believe that a report card should serve as meaningful feedback to students and to parents about their child's learning. So it offers an opportunity for a child with their parent to reflect on, where are the areas that I'm strong as a math student? If I get a grade that just says I'm a B, I'm very good. But we also know our math programs are integrated math programs. And when you're in a math program in 7th or 8th grade, you're not just doing math. You're doing some algebra, and you're doing some geometry, and you're working on ratios and proportions. We don't all have the same facility in every sort of discipline within the discipline of math. Some of us were probably, as in high school, we were stronger algebra students than we were geometry students. So in this system, we can communicate a little bit more the complexity of what the kids are doing and how they're doing in the various components of what is our discipline and our subject area. Another very important place that we started, that I think you will see a lot of this come out in some of the work that some of our decisions in moving to a standards-based grading and reporting, is what we value and believe in the middle school about learning. First, we think all of our children can learn our curriculum. We think we have an attainable and reachable and rigorous curriculum at AES, and we believe that we can support and get all students there. We also know that not all children learn at the same rate and move along the same path. Learning is a journey for all of us, and that journey is different for every single one of us. But the destination is the same. We also think just because it's a Friday and it's the end of a quarter and I gave a test, that we're not necessarily done with learning that content. We know that sometimes the way in which you get something is by having that assessment and failing. And really coming back and saying, I don't understand why I don't get that, and spending the time to dig in and learn it. So we really believe that assessment doesn't end just because we gave the test. It's why we have a reassessment policy at AES. And this is a really good example of some of the ways that, though we are not reporting out in a standards-based grading and reporting system yet, your children are being taught and are learning in a standards-based grading and reporting system because of things like an assessment policy, because of this belief that we believe that assessment should be ongoing, and kids should have an opportunity to fail and then demonstrate that they learned. And that continual feedback is what students need to grow, and that they need to be reflecting on their learning. I think you can see this directly connected to the report card purpose. That we think that the report card is an additional opportunity for reflection, and we're going to share some research today about the importance of feedback in terms of student learning. So though we really talk about our journey at AES, and we've been working on this for 2.5 years, This really goes back so much farther. There is a historical context here, really in our profession as educators. In the late 80s, standards were established at national levels or at state levels in the United States, either through National Discipline Organization. And standards are what we identified that we want children to be able to know and be able to do. Before we had standards in the late 80s, Colleen and I could be teaching in the same department, the same discipline, in rooms next door to each other. But she may have something that she thought was really important for her kids to know and be able to do, and I may have something different. And two children are having vastly different educational experiences because her targets were different than my targets. Because we didn't have documents to really kind of guide us in what does 8th grade English language arts look like? What are my targets as a teacher? So this was part of the educational reform movement in the United States and really in all of the English-speaking nations to try and establish some targets and some goals so that we could provide a legitimate, guaranteed education to all students, not some students. A lot of things in international schools, they start in our home countries, and then they move out into international schools a little bit later. So it wasn't really until 10 to 15 years later that AES adopted their first set of standards and benchmarks. In 2004 and 2005, as a school, we adopted a curriculum planning model. So for a while, Colleen and I would have had standards and benchmarks. We had the same targets, but we didn't really have any agreements as to certain assessments, what are the priorities within those targets. And so a big move that the AES made, and is widely used in most schools at this point, is some sort of curriculum design model. And the curriculum design model that we use at AES is called Understanding by Design, where Colleen and I sit and we collaboratively look at what does the first unit of 8th grade look like, what are our learning targets, what are the understandings we want kids to have, what are the questions and the assessments that we're going to ask to get them there, how are we going to know that they learned the material. So we have a lot of agreement in the school about what are the learning targets and what are the major assessments that we're going to be including. And this work for us really started about 10 years ago. So in some ways, we are still in international schools, like we're taking this research in, we're taking this learning in, and we're incorporating it and bringing it in. Some of our work even this year, we sometimes go back to these units and rethink them and revise them when we adopt new standards, when new research comes out. So they're very much living documents for us. And they are meant to serve for us as teachers is where do we start at the beginning of a quarter or beginning of a year, and what are the key assessments that happen. A huge piece of Understanding by Design is assessment. And there has been, I think, a realization in our profession, and I remember the first time I read this, I kind of went, oh my God, that's right. We were trained to teach. We were trained to put curriculum together as teachers. Our teacher training programs don't have assessment components. You don't take an assessment class as a teacher in training. I certainly never did, and I would say most of my peers didn't. Younger teachers are getting that training because we realize as a profession that this has been sort of an egregious sort of lapse in teacher training. And so you kind of learn by doing. You learn by saying, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, by having those collaborative conversations with your peers. And so a lot of schools, sort of acknowledging this wide gap in teacher training, have taken on assessment literacy as a focus. And AES has certainly been one of those schools to talk about assessment literacy, to look at what the research says, so that the activities and the things that we do in class have the largest possible impact on student learning. There is not a lot of time. We don't have time to waste. What we do has to be effective and thoughtful. And so we spent a lot of time at AES learning about assessment practices, rethinking our assessment practices, and that's where you're seeing a lot of evidence of this already in the classes that your children are in. And then as Beth said, in 2011, as really part of all of this assessment work, we went to Oman to meet with Thomas Guskey, who is one of the leading thinkers on standards-based grading and reporting, and in fact is leading entire states through this process to reform their reporting. We took a K-12 group to learn about standards-based grading and reporting, and then we came back, as a group, we really thought, does this make sense? Does this fit who we are and where we're going? Does this fit with our assessment practices that we've been working on? Did I just use that back? And the group came back, and it was really a group of teachers. The current curriculum director at the time went, and a K-12 group of teachers came back, and we recommended that we thought this is something that we should look at. In the elementary school, this is leading to a revision of their standards-based report card because they are already standards-based. In the middle school, this is leading to the creation of a standards-based grading and reporting system. And in the high school, there are conversations about assessment practices, going back to the research and the literature. So it's very much playing out in different ways at different levels of the school and in appropriate ways. What's appropriate for middle school may not be appropriate in elementary, and likewise in high school. And each school has to take sort of their context on and really think through what's the most appropriate work for that school. And then in the middle school, we chose that the most appropriate work for us was, because of all of our learning about assessment, to really start moving to a standards-based grading and reporting system. And I'm going to give some examples about some of the things that in a standards-based grading and reporting system, some of the things that existing in a traditional system that make it so difficult to kind of put the two systems together, and I'll get there a little bit later. So I just want to give you an opportunity a little bit to do a little bit of reflection on your own educational experience and what it was like to be a student for you and when you went to school. Because when we went to school and we were educated, we did not have most of these assessment practices in place. We didn't have a lot of understanding about them. Most of us grew up in a norm reference system. I remember starting in chemistry my junior year of high school and being a B student. I had chemistry the last class of the day. The teachers gave the same test all day long. By the last period of the day, everybody had the test. And if you didn't cheat, because it was graded on a curve, your grade went down. I probably attended 2 years of chemistry because I dropped chemistry and took it again the following year, but in an early morning class. Because that's how we were graded. We were compared to one another. That what I knew and what I could do didn't matter. It mattered how I compared to the other kids in the class. If I was in a high-flying class, my grade was lower. If I was in a low-flying class, my grade might be higher. And that's how we were graded. That's the educational system we existed in. Everything was on a 100-point scale. Sometimes everything had the same value, regardless of whether it was a homework or whether it was a paper or whether it was a test. Everything meant the same in the grade book. Scores were averaged. If I didn't do my homework, my final grade changed. It didn't say anything about my learning. It meant I was lazy or busy or made a bad choice. But the translation to my parents was, she doesn't know the material, not that I didn't do the work. If I was good, if I was polite, if I raised my hand and I participated, I was rewarded for that in my final grade. As a teacher, I have been in schools and in situations where we were expected to have a certain percentage of the grade as participation. But what does me being polite and good at raising my hand say about my learning at the end of the day? It says more about my habits and who I am as a worker or an individual, which we value, which we think is important. But we also think it muddies and it clouds up what we understand about what students know and can do. If I stayed after and cleaned the classroom, I might also be rewarded in my final grade. As a teacher, I have given extra credit. For sure, I have given extra credit. Because that's just kind of the system that we kind of worked in. It's what we knew, It's how things operated for us. And going into teaching as a young teacher and only knowing what I know and never having any assessment training, I replicated some of the bad systems that we had been a part of. But luckily, that's where, when you're part of really good schools and you're committed to learning, it gives you an opportunity to reflect on those practices and say, you know what, extra credit doesn't make a lot of sense. If I cut school, I remember in high school, we looked at it like you had 2 unexcused absences and then your grade was lowered. And a lot of kids looked at that as like, wow, I can miss twice and it has no effect on my grade. If I went over that, then my grade was lowered, which again doesn't say anything about our learning. Everything we did in the system that we were raised in counted for or against us, and a lot of that wasn't related to our learning. So a lot of what we're talking about here, a lot of us were really successful in school. We were A students. We raised our hands. We participated. That system worked for a lot of us. But we're also here today saying that we don't think that system communicates very effectively about what a child knows and can do, and especially in terms of sending them off into the following grade or the following school or a career or a college, that we want to change what we know about student learning. So think about this for just a second. What we know and what we experience is no longer what we believe is best practice for grading and student learning. Here's a good example. This is also in your packet on pages 10 and 11, if you need to see it a little bit better. And then there's an explanation on page 11 as well. So really the question is, what's in a grade? This is in a system where everything was averaged. Every child ended up with the exact same percentage at the end, which translates to a C. But if you look at their pathways, they had very different pathways to that C. The first student struggled, got better, still gets a C. Number 5 started strong, by the end isn't demonstrating much learning, and gets the same grade as the student who struggled at the beginning, but by the end is demonstrating that they understand and they master the content. Student 6 skipped school. Even though they know all of the material, they're also going to get the same grade. Student 7 did very, very well and then cheated at the end. I want to be really clear about this. We care if kids skip school. We care if students plagiarize. What we question is how and where is that communicated? Is the best way to communicate it by giving a child a C and saying they don't know the material? Or are there better ways for us to communicate student behavior? That's a very big component of a standards-based grading and reporting system. So this is from an educational researcher, Doug Reeves, who does this experiment all over the place, everywhere he goes. Kind of saying, all right, if these are the grades that we have, try and figure out what would you give that child at the end? What would be the grade? And his findings are really, the answers are all over the place. Because how you would put it together would be different. I can put it together and I can justify giving this child any number of grades, depending on how I put the components together. What are my values? So really, in the end, what does a C mean if there's a bunch of other stuff there? And this really, I think, explains a little bit better kind of the way that we see learning and the system in which we work. You know, right here we have our learning targets. Our learning targets are really set out by our standards and benchmarks. They tell us where we're going as teachers and where we're trying to get them. Everyone in our class, we have the same goal for every child in our class. But I think you can see a lot of our values also replicated in here. That we think all children can learn our curriculum. This is our curriculum. But we also know not everybody has the same pathway to getting there. If I have to grade these 4 students in a traditional system, Kai and Leilani are not going to have a communication to their parents that says they learned our curriculum. They're going to get a C or they're going to get a D because Leilani really struggled and didn't get it to the end. So in a traditional system, we're going to hold that against her. A kid like Raul, who comes in high flyer, for me as a teacher, what I need to be thinking about is, you know what, this is going to be a pretty easy target for him. How do I make sure that he has a rich learning experience when my curriculum is already pretty accessible to him? We don't think these kids deserve different grades. We think they all learned the same in the end. And in the standards-based grading and reporting system, we have the option, we have the opportunity to communicate and to show that you went on a different path. You might have struggled, but you got there. And that's our goal, is to get you there. This is the biggest challenge for us as adults who were educated in different systems, who came from different expectations. This is really our challenge in this shift in the system, because it is changing, not just at AES. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But we are by no means a school that is out on the cutting edge of this work. We are in the pack doing good work with a lot of other really good schools. And we've been able to look to some really good schools for guidance, advice, because there are some schools internationally who did this 4 or 5 years ago. So we are really, it may feel very, very new, it may feel very, very different, but in the context of where we're at in our peer schools internationally, we're with a bunch of really good schools doing similar good work at the same time. This is something that as we get a little bit closer, you can see sort of our report card models and proposals. I think this is something that's really important for us to sort of highlight to you as parents, where we're coming from and where a lot of our thinking is based. Carol Dweck is an author that we have spent a lot of time looking at her work and thinking about her work in the middle school. And it's this idea of fixed versus growth mindsets and what kind of students we want in terms of their student learning. And this is where it becomes really important that you are more than a number or more than a letter. That it should be that you can change that, and it should be that you can progress in your learning. We want students to understand that what they don't know can be learned. It's not that I'm just not good in math, so I can't do math. Maybe where I struggle is geometry, and what I really struggle with is angles. And that's my struggle. And how do I fix that challenge for me as a math student, instead of throwing up my hands and saying, I'm not good at math, I'll never be able to do math. That's not the kind of way we want students to approach their learning. And a system of standards-based grading and reporting helps us support thinking like growth mindset. There's a lot of different types of assessment that support standards-based grading and reporting, and this is where I think a lot of what you're probably seeing a lot of this come home, and the importance of it. Self-assessment. And I'm sort of laying some of this out, and this is why it's also in your packet. So we're going to go through some research, and there's a lot of research about how important these practices are in terms of student learning. But these are some practices that are very important in a standards-based environment, as that kids are always thinking about their own learning and deciding where they're at in a real and authentic way. Not like, oh, I'm great, I give myself an A. But really working with kids to say, I really struggle with nonfiction literacy. I have a hard time identifying main ideas. What are some strategies for me to work through with my teacher to help me get better at that? So it's really self-assessment where we really get to have a lot of these conversations with kids. We know that we need to give really high quality feedback to students about where they're at in their learning and what they need to do to get better. And learning targets, clear, articulated learning targets are a very important piece of this system. Our learning targets come from our standards. Learning can't be a mystery. If it's a journey, I should know the destination. So we want kids to know the destination of where they're going because they can't identify where they're at in their learning, or they can't identify when they've gotten there if they don't know the end goal. So this is a really key assessment practice for this system. Formative assessment, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more with some research. And this is where we can get a little bit jargony. You know, I'm sure learning targets is jargony too, but it's where we get a little bit jargony in this kind of work. But formative assessment is kind of the practice that we have. Kind of think of the coach metaphor. We have lots and lots of practices where the coach, I love watching this in like soccer games. You know that coach in like a soccer game is sitting there at practice yelling at people, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. Well, a lot of times at game day, what do? They sit down on the side and they watch the game. Because that's the game, it's not the practice anymore. That's the summative end of assessment. But do we hold practice against you in the soccer game? We just look at the game. So our use of formative assessment and all that practice is a really important piece of how we work in this system and what we do with it. As you know, we have a very strong belief in reassessment, you know, at AES. And if you didn't get it this time and the learning still continues, you come back and you've gotten help, then there's an opportunity to demonstrate that you know it again. And we don't hold that against you by keeping your bad grade. We'll replace it with the grade that you did better on. We don't believe that grades are used as punishment. There are other places to say that you are not responsible. There are other places to say that you didn't do your homework. There are other places to say you don't play well with other kids in the class. We don't believe that your assessment of academic learning is the most effective way for us to communicate things that are behaviors. And everything is criterion referenced. I'm not competing against Colleen anymore and worried that she's going to do really well and my grade goes lower because of the curve. Colleen and I can both do really well because we're being compared to what the learning target is. What were we supposed to demonstrate? What were we supposed to know? And what we were supposed to do? And if we can both show it, then we both get the recognition for what we learned. Not that it looks like I learned less because she did so much better. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. There's some stuff in your packets as well. And we are going to put this all on the website too. You know, I think this is also really interesting in our profession is we didn't have a huge body of research to rely on until really about the 1990s, about what are really strong educational practices. And you know the way research goes is I say this, you can find something else that says that. And I think one of the really effective methods in educational research is something called a meta-analysis. It's really aggregate analysis. So we're not really looking at like, this worked for you or this teacher in their class, and therefore it's applicable and good for all students. It's really pulling lots of research together about the same information and coming up with some statistics on what's the overall impact of that instructional strategy. And so we use a lot of meta-analysis, and we rely on a lot of meta-analysis in education because it's just far more reliable than just one-off piece here or one-off piece there. So these are some of the meta-analysis that really underlie some of those assessment practices that I was just pointing out to you in the standards-based grading and reporting system. John Hattie is a researcher from New Zealand out of the University of Melbourne, where he has done probably the largest educational meta-analysis to date. It's called Visible Learning, where he quantifies and qualifies hundreds of instructional practices to say what is beneficial and what is detrimental. And it's very interesting to look at some of the things that we think are hugely beneficial. They're like maybe a little beneficial. But there are some things that we haven't thought about as much that are hugely beneficial. So what it means here is anything, he has deemed anything higher than 0.4 is considered high impact because it impacts student growth rates in learning by more than 1 year. More than 1 year's expected growth. The absolute highest impact, this is the highest one, is self-assessment. The kids thinking about their learning, which is really kind of tied down here to the metacognitive strategies. You know, thinking about what we're learning and thinking about what we're doing. The use of practice and feedback related to practice is some of the best things that we can do for students in their learning. Not labeling them, not letting students identify as I'm bad in math, is also hugely beneficial. If children have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset, they will be better learners, and they will learn more than their peers who have a fixed mindset. That having cooperative learning strategies, and Colleen and I not competing for the same grade, that having the same opportunity, also hugely beneficial. And I like obviously we know parent involvement is important, and I think this is one of the reasons I pulled this one was at the heart of what we're doing when you go back to our purpose statement of the report card. It's about giving you and your children more information about their learning so you can have better conversations with them, more detailed conversations with them. It gives you an opportunity as a parent to be involved in a different way in their learning. Rather than you didn't do your homework, why didn't you do your homework? When that homework was just, you turned it in, you got full points, you didn't do it, you got a 0. Well, your homework says you're really struggling here. What are you struggling with? What could you go talk to the teacher about? It's a very different conversation to know that your child is struggling with a homework piece rather than 5 points, thumbs up, you did it. Okay, so it offers opportunities for parental involvement as well. Marzano, who I also just quoted about meta-analysis and what meta-analysis is, has also done a lot of work on strategies. And some of these here are also, practices that we use in a standards-based system. Effort, feedback, goal setting in both of them was really important. You know, this idea of goals and learning targets is very important according to the research. In his study here, if a student is tracking their effort and monitoring how they're doing as a responsible person, how are they doing as a respectful person, how are they doing as a collaborator, if they're paying attention to their effort versus a student who didn't, the student who pays attention increases their learning by 29%. If we give feedback relating to learning targets to a student versus a student who didn't get any feedback relating to learning targets, the child that gets more information does 23% better than the child who doesn't get the information. So these are all pieces of what we do here. And this one I think is really important. This is where this piece in particular, with all that we have learned in the past 5 years about assessment, and all that we have incorporated into our assessment practices at AES, I would say probably from the teacher perspective, this is the reason teachers are so excited about standards-based grading and reporting, because we struggle with what to do with formative assessment. The research tells us how important it is. We know we need to be monitoring it. We know we need to be tracking it, but we also know it's practice. And we also know it's not fair to hold practice against you in the grade book. So what happens in a standards-based grading and reporting system is when I put formative assessment in the grade book, it's not held against you in a point system. It just says how you're doing, how are we tracking your learning, how is your practice going as you lead up to the final game or the final games. We hesitate when we've learned all of this about grades and numbers and wanting to communicate effectively, we hesitate on what to put in the grade book. And I know we've struggled with the school about what to do with that, because the grade book is a huge communication tool for you as parents. You want to see the formative assessment in there, but then in the end, that formative assessment is often held against your child in their final grade. So as teachers, we're kind of caught between operating in a system that we believe in and that's research-based, and reporting out on a system that research and those beliefs don't support. So what stays the same at AES? There's an awful lot that is not changing. The middle school communicates learning in several different ways. We have an online and open gradebook. We will continue to have an online and open gradebook. We still have report cards. It's just the look of the report cards is going to change. We still have report cards. We will continue to have parent conferences, but we're hoping those are even better conversations because we all will have more information about the student learning where they're at. We're always constantly in contact as teachers with parents and back and forth. And I think this relationship is a very important relationship in middle school because it's really leading them to high school, where we really expect students to be a lot more responsible and own a lot of the learning in high school and be a lot more responsible for their learning in high school. But we're starting to set those patterns and have those conversations with students in the middle school to prepare them for the added sort of independence and responsibility that you have as a high school teacher. So this relationship, I think, is a hugely important one in the middle school. It's why we have advisory programs. It's why we have all of these other things, is so that teachers and students have an opportunity to talk about their learning. Because we're really helping the kids to own their learning and identify what is it that they need to know and do in relation to those learning targets. So in this system, the components of what we just described are not going to change. None of that is going away. All of that will remain next year. Our curriculum, our standards and benchmarks, we're not changing what we do on a day-to-day basis. If your child did really well in math, or we had big growth scores in math this year, that's the curriculum. None of that is going to change. We're not all of a sudden changing what the content is in any classroom. We're just looking at how do we best give kids feedback on their learning and how do we best report that out to you and to students. Our units of study, like I just said, all of this is going to remain the same. Our values around assessment and learning are not changing. In fact, they're probably deepening, if anything. You know, we've had these values, we've been having these conversations for years, and so none of that is really going to change. So a lot of what you're already experiencing kind of underlie our current system already. And we still believe that we need to recognize students for being successful students. The difference is now we're going to be able to talk about academic success and who's successful in terms of being respectful and responsible and collaborative and persevering. That really goes to show when we have kids who work so hard, but getting to that learning target is difficult for them. But in this system, we're going to be able to recognize students who succeed in other ways than just academics. And for us as teachers, that's hugely beneficial. I will take a hardworking kid any day of the week over a child who says, got it, what am I doing here? But there are some changes in this system. There are some things that are going to look different. Really, and this isn't such a big change, but I think you're going to really see, you know, the evidence of the research that we're talking about in the practices next year. You know, our use of formative assessment, we should see documentation of formative assessment increasing in the grade book because it won't be held against the student in the final grade. There'll be, I think, a lot more intentional self-assessment and reflection. Students are going to be communicated very clearly their learning targets. So they should know the learning targets and be able to articulate the learning targets. And they should be able to really have conversations about where they are vis-a-vis those learning targets. So these are some things that we stop doing in a standards-based system. We won't be averaging anymore. We won't have points, so there's nothing to average. I think I'm doing faster than I was last time, right, Beth? I'm not as nervous tonight. Homework will not be as part of the academic grade. We care about homework, we value homework. If it's formative assessment, it will be documented as formative assessment. If it's a high leverage piece of homework that we get a lot of information about student learning, we'll document it in our gradebook. If it was something that we asked you to do a reflection or we asked you to do some extra problems, it may not go in the gradebook. But if you don't do it, it will go in the gradebook because you haven't been responsible. And we'll label it as a responsibility mark to communicate to you. And you'll still see if a child didn't turn in an assignment. That will still be there. None of that will go away. It's just really the things that you see in Veracross now, in terms of numbers, will be replaced by language. We won't give zeros. Because if you have a 0, I'm going to give you an incomplete. Because if you didn't do the work, your learning is not complete. And I can't give you a grade until you complete the learning process. And an incomplete communicates that. A 0 says you didn't do it. An incomplete says you're not done. So there isn't that easy out of just well, I'll just take a 0 for it. I mean, I know as a teacher, I stopped giving zeros a long time ago. This was a very easy practice for a lot of teachers to pick up and stop giving zeros and start giving incompletes. I can't give you a final assessment of where you're at in your learning until you've done the work. And that becomes the pressure to get it done. You know, we sometimes think the 0 is the pressure, but it's actually, I can't tell you how you did until you do the work. So zeros go away, and we'll use things like incompletes instead. We won't include group work in the academic grade. Just because you sat by the kid in the class that really works their tail off and will do all the work doesn't mean you're going to get the A anymore. You're responsible for your own learning. If you're in group work and you're not working to your capacity or you are really working to your capacity, we'll report that in our learning habits about you as a collaborator. And we know collaboration is a really important 21st century skill. We value it, we want to report on it, but we don't want, because someone in your group did all the work, that doesn't say anything about your learning. So we've got to really separate out in group work who does the work, who owns the learning, and how do we report that. So group grades will no longer be a part of our reporting system. We will not include behaviors in academic grades, because behavior doesn't tell us what you learned and what you know how to do. We won't penalize you if your work is late. We will say you are irresponsible. If you did your work late, that doesn't really say anything about your capacity as an academic learner. It says more about your responsibility. And so we will communicate late work in those ways. You will not get one single grade for a class. There will no longer be Math B, Humanities A. Because what we do and how we break down our curriculum is so much more than reducing it to Humanities A. What does that mean? We want to communicate to you about what your child is like as a writer. How are they as a reader of fiction versus a reader of nonfiction? Two very different genres of reading. So you will get several pieces of information related to what they do and learn in a humanities class, not just one single grade for humanities any longer. There are three main components of a standards-based grading and reporting report card. I'm going to show you some mock-ups that we've been working on here at AES. First, we're going to talk about academic achievement, which are related to the standards and the benchmarks, the learning targets that I'm talking about. And then the learning habits and the behaviors, and then we will continue to give comments on progress and how students are doing. So next year, and this is just a mock-up, we are going to report out on learning habits. The 4 learning habits we've identified at AES are respectful, responsible, collaborative, and I think you can really see the work of Carol Dweck here in Perseverance. Do you have a growth mindset? Are you always working towards growing? Right now, we give effort grades. We don't have rubrics for effort grades. You never see an effort grade documented or recorded in the grade book. We don't have effort assignments. You know, effort is usually something that happens at the end, that we sit in our rooms by ourselves with only me and my thinking about what effort means to decide whether your child is excellent in effort, good in effort, or needs improvement in effort. I think this is actually one of the biggest changes in our reporting system, is that we are saying that effort is really important. It's more complex than the word effort indicates, that we will have rubrics that are available to you and to the students, and we will regularly capture and document learning habits in our grade book. This is a very big change for us as teachers. This is probably the biggest change for us as teachers. We are used to documenting all kinds of assignments in our grade book. We are not used to tracking behavior in our grade books and sort of capturing that. So we've had a lot of process on the learning habits, and we're still really kind of working on what's the report card going to look like, what are the best words to report this out, and also really the rubrics. But this has also been a really great place for us to include students and student thinking. And so we've been doing surveys of students, we've been doing surveys of teachers. What does it mean? What does it mean to be respectful? What does it feel like when you're being respectful? So we can really kind of capture and use the kids' thinking on developing these rubrics. And as I pointed out, like, these are our 4 learning habits for next year. And we will develop rubrics at the start of the year. And the plan is to bring together a group of teachers and students to develop these rubrics that will then be widely used. So this is going to happen very early in the year so that we can start using them right away. But we're going to kind of have a standard for this that we've never had as teachers before. We're going to have an agreed upon school-wide agreement of what good collaboration looks like, where we've never had that before. In our profession, we've never had that before. And we will document and we will track it in the grade book. Sometimes there will be assignments, like if you're doing group work, there may be an assignment that's put in there that's about you as a collaborator in the group work. We may have an assignment where we think you were really perseverant and maybe you really struggled, but man, you worked really hard. We'll be able to attach that to that assignment so that you as a parent, you might see, my child is far, far away from meeting the standard. But wow, they are working really hard. So we're going to be able to communicate to you in this way about a particular assignment or a particular activity. In reporting achievement, I'm going to show you a couple of different things. This really goes over 3 slides. In reporting achievement, it's all in relation to the standard. And the words that we will be using are meeting standard, approaching the standard, beginning standard, or no understanding of the standard. Meeting the standard is the top of our scale because the goal is meeting the standard. Now, we recognize, we know that we have a vast array of learning styles, potential in our classrooms. This is Zones of Proximal Development from Vygotsky, who's also a philosopher whose thinking has had a big impact on education. And what it really is saying that, learning is a progression. And in that progression, we have proficient, which is really, that's the target. That's what our standards and benchmarks tell us and where we're supposed to go. We know that most kids are on track, but still not really there. We don't expect an 8th grader to have mastered 8th grade curriculum in September. It's a process. We have a year to teach them, and we have a year to get them there. So most kids are usually on track for proficient and identifying and knowing what's the target and what do I have to do to get there. We know that we have some kids that the curriculum's a real challenge for, but we also believe that they can learn our curriculum. And so we have an opportunity to report out that a child doesn't have an understanding of the standard yet. We also recognize that we have some kids who do come in and they master the curriculum or they hit the targets quicker than other students. And we need to recognize those students as well. But just like there are very few of them at the bottom, there are very few of them at the top. And because of that, we have also sort of special reporting language. So there is a piece to indicate that if your child has met the standard, but they are extending beyond the standard, they are doing above grade level work, there is a place, and we will document and communicate that to you in the grade book and on the report card, that your child is far exceeding our expectations, because some kids do. So we have definitely left a place to recognize those children who are really extending beyond the standard. We also have left a way to communicate to you that your child is not working at grade level. That the work that they're currently showing us, we're modifying it and making it easier because they're struggling. We have kids on academic support. We have kids on IEPs. We really try and meet the needs of our community and the needs of our kids. We also think that kids are enriched by diversity in the classroom. So it's important for us to have all of these people in the classroom together. It makes for a better, richer learning experience for everyone. There are times when we won't be able to give a grade to a child because maybe they came in 3 or 4 weeks before the end of the semester. And we don't have enough, dang it. Sometimes that happens. We get sick, things happen, so we don't have enough evidence or information to give a grade yet. And so we'll communicate that. And then the last one I was talking about is really, I think, the power of the incomplete. Like, you didn't do your work, you're not done. I know I, as a teacher, use this extensively. I'm not giving you a grade. And we think zeros are powerful. When a kid doesn't receive the mark and they get an incomplete, that's a pretty powerful communication tool to say, you've got some learning to complete before I can communicate how you're doing. I have never had an incomplete converted over to a no grade or a lower grade as a teacher. Like, the kids come through. So we're working through a couple of different mock-ups on our report cards. I like to think that we have 3.5 weeks left to keep working on this. We're working very diligently. So what happens, there is in your packet, after the presentation, there are 3 pages of sort of vocabulary and explanation of words, because these standards that we use as teachers, they're for us. And they're kind of complex, they're very large in number, and I don't think anyone would want 50 marks for English to go home on a report card. But that's kind of how we collect evidence. So what we do is we have created for every course or subject area reporting strands. So that we're taking this big mass of information that we collect as professionals and sort of funneling it to you in about 4 to 6 reporting strands. So you will have a reporting strand that really the focus on this unit in science was properties of matter. And down here, you'll have 2 to 3 bullet points that says, what does that mean? I know if I was a parent, if I were to see number sense for math, I would be like, what exactly does that mean? So what we wanted to do, because we are talking about, we want to communicate better. This is where we actually use some parents to tell us what they wanted on the report cards. And one of the things that they indicated is they really liked having the bullet points to kind of tell me, what exactly are you talking about in terms of properties of matter? So every subject area had the opportunity for each of these strands to kind of say, what are your 2 to 3 bullet points to explain this to parents? And we really kind of work through, like, let's make the language accessible. It's not for us, it's for parents. We're going to get to questions. Or go ahead.
What's the difference between non-assessed and no grade?
Sometimes it just depends on what the work is that time. So not assessed means that during that semester, this was not a part of the work. That's all that means. It's a good question.
And no grade?
And no grade means you were not able to grade it. They didn't maybe do that. They maybe weren't here for that. That would be the difference. So that's the reporting strand and then just sort of the details. And then you've got the levels of the academic proficiency where we say where you're situated in your learning on that learning progression. I'm almost done now. Here's just another mock that we're looking through. I'm looking at, does it work better as a grid? Does it work better as a drop down? These kinds of things, the strands and the details content, that's the stuff we have figured out. It's how to best represent it as a communication tool to parents. That's the part that we're still working on. And then the last part will be comments. So you will still receive narratives, but narratives are really meant to be very much targeted at what do they need to do to improve? How's their progress going? So there'll be very sort of directive sort of instructions about what belongs in the comment. When we've given you all this other information somewhere else, comments are not the time for us to repeat what that already says. And thinking about like what goes in the comments that's different and not on that report card. And this is what you currently receive. But at the end of every semester, you also receive comments. So from our perspective, as teachers in the way that we work, given our values and our purpose statement, we believe we're doing a better job by reporting in a standards-based grading and reporting environment. And giving you a different report card that has more information. So something that we use often, they're called rubrics. You might have seen these rubrics go home. I just kind of want to illustrate to you the way in which we've changed in our understanding of as teachers have changed. This is my rubric from about 10 years ago. I did not do this to your children. Somebody asked that last night. Did you use that here? No. I did not use that here. But you know, we've learned a lot about what's really good feedback, what's really good information. When you look at this rubric, did you follow the instructions? What was your attitude and attendance like? What were your work habits? Very little of this has to do with the student learning. It had a lot more to do with habits. This is what rubrics look like today. And this is how we use rubrics as professionals. It's all about the learning and the content. We take it through the various potential iterations of that learning progression and say, this is what it looks like when you need improvement. This is what it looks like when you are knocking this out of the park. If you're here, this is what it needs to look like to move here. So there's a lot that has shifted for us as professionals. This is actually Drew Murphy, one of our 7th grade teachers' rubrics. And I think this really reflects the journey that we have as a profession been making that puts our practices more in line with reporting in a standards-based environment than a traditional grading environment. So are we alone in this work? As I said at the beginning, we're not the only school to be doing this. There are several schools that we are doing this with in our region. In the MESA region, there are many schools in IRCOS doing this. I will say though, and I think this is a really important piece, is this is for a community to go through this, for a school to go through this. This is a choice process. Do you continue to give letter grades and do you repurpose them and change what they mean? Do you get rid of letter grades and just give on a 1 to 4 scale? Or do you choose proficiency language? We have chosen proficiency language. Just because you may see another school continue to give A, go and look at what they say an A means. They don't say that an A means excellent. They repurpose what an A means. They repurpose and they target their A to proficiency language. Just because you give numbers doesn't mean you average. So we can have slightly different iterations, but what lies underneath are the same philosophical tenets and ideas. Just in that process, they made slightly different choices around how they were going to report out on student learning, that they will report out on in a similar way with just different language. And this is widely happening in the United States and North America as well. I think the point here is we really are not out there on our own. We really are, I think, among a lot of schools doing this, and we have a lot of resources to help us and support us along the way, and we have, really use these resources. So we have really been trying to work with our students and teachers. Some of this is repetitive, so I'm going to go fast. But our teachers have really dug in and made a strong commitment to this work with various task forces. I think some of the proficiency language task force was probably 25 hours of work to come up with that language and those definitions. I think one of the huge benefits for people like Beth and I, working in a school like AES, is the teachers that we work with and their commitment to learning and bettering their practice, always. This is one of the biggest learning institutions I personally have ever been a member of as faculty. And because when we think about the work that these teachers have done, it's really an amazing level of commitment and passion to the work and the learning that we've been doing this year. And there has been just considerable professional learning and dialogue. I think it's all we've done in middle school, it seems like, I'm sorry. We have been communicating with this to the board about a year after we went to Oman. We as a K-12 group presented to the whole faculty and made the recommendation that this was the road that we wanted to recommend that the school move down at each school to start exploring in a way that was best appropriate for them. And then about a year after that, we made a presentation to the board, basically laying out some of the things that we're laying out for you. We did a couple of parent presentations last year. We've done some more parent presentations this year. We've had parents sort of looking at report cards and letting us know what they like, what seems like a more effective communication tool to them. And then I know that Beth has been consulting with the middle school PSA about the various mock-up report cards that we have. And we will continue to support everyone in their learning on this journey. So I want you to think a little bit about what are some of the things that, as we've taken on this work and as we've gone through this, it's really been, the focus for us has been about student learning and communication. And these are just some of the things that we want for you and your children. I think, in a community like AES, where we have people coming and going, we definitely want to address the transition piece. Beth and the counselors have been working on what's called a profile that really kind of contextualizes and explains the system. Basically gives, if you're going to another school, how do you translate this? What does it mean about student learning? It's something that high schools have that they send out to colleges. It's a really key translation piece for colleges in admitting students into high school. We also believe that increasingly more and more of our students are going to go into a similar system. They may have made different choices about language in reporting and learning, but in terms of the components of it and breaking it down and understanding what we do, more and more of our students are coming to us from those systems. More and more of our students will be going to those systems. And we do really see students from a variety of situations. So I asked Scott to sort of come in for a moment. Scott White, who is our admissions director, who's probably on the front lines of transcripts and school information. I asked him to come, if he could maybe comment a little bit about what you see and how we deal with what we see.
As I said last night, most of the applications that I get for elementary students, they're coming from standards-based systems, so that's really not unusual. It is rare that if we do get occasionally reports from schools that are still using number grades, which kind of stands out to us. Middle school, increasingly, we're getting more standards-based reports, but we have had instances, and I think it goes back to what Stacey was talking about what an A or a B means. We have had students that come from high schools in the U.S., middle schools in the U.S., elementary schools in the U.S., or international schools overseas that we might not be familiar with, that really got here and were really not A or B students. And so we often question the integrity of what the letter of number grade means, just because, as Stacey was pointing out, we don't know what went into it.
So the next steps for us is on Friday, there's an opportunity if you'd like to come talk about some of the readings. There's also an opportunity is after you go away from here, if you have more questions, like to please come back. We want to answer your questions. We want to try and meet your needs as best we can. In August, we'll be orienting you more to Power School. We're still in the midst of Power School. And I think one of the things that, I wish that we had was to show you more of that now, because I think that's probably definitely a need from parents, but we are diligently working on it, right, David? Yesterday we were doing, uploading standards and all of this back-end work to put it all together so that you can see it from the parent portal. And then we will continue next year to educate parents, ask questions. We do know that we're always going to have new people come in, that they may or may not be familiar with this system. And so we're very committed to equipping our new parents and supporting our parents as we go through this implementation process. So there is a website, which a parent had a very good idea last night that we probably should be linking to our school website, which I will do probably this week. We've been doing some curriculum presentations this year, and so everything that I just presented to you is up there about this, our past presentations, readings, articles, videos, frequently asked questions. I will use your Post-its from today. In fact, my assistant is already typing them up, and we'll go through and we'll look at them and say, what have we answered on the website, what have we not, what can we answer, what should we answer. So I'm going to really use what you can provide with us today to help us really put the resources online that you need. So if you could, we'd like to take this very quick activity, and then we can have a seat and we can take some of your questions. We asked you to keep these Post-its because we do have these questions all around the room, and it starts north, south, east, and west. If you have some Post-its that you can kind of categorize into one of those 4 questions, if we can just take 5 or 10 minutes to slap them up here. If there's something that you thought about that you don't have in a Post-it and you want to write it on the poster paper, please feel free to do this. We do take this feedback very seriously. In fact, Beth and I have a big debrief meeting today, and that's probably the place that we'll start with, is with your feedback.
I'm sorry, let me ask just one question, because I have a lot of questions, but always cannot answer. Where is that homework fit?
Homework would fit, it depends on what the homework is. If it's homework that I'm really getting, there's some homework that is, I need you to go through this, and we just need to know that you did it. But then there's other homework that I'm really are you understanding this? Are you getting this? Where are you situated in your learning? If it's that kind of homework, it will go in the grade book, and it will receive a mark of are you at standard? Are you approaching standard? Are you beginning standard? If you're regularly doing all of that homework, or you're not regularly doing all of that homework, then that gets reflected in the behaviors. So homework still has a place. In fact, it can go in 2 places. Yes, we will be orienting the children to this next year as well. Yeah. I think for us, we see that because we've known this is coming and we've been working on this for the past 2.5 years, a lot of this has been incorporated into what we're already doing. But yes, I think especially in the assessing and documenting it, in the grade book, there is an additional, she was asking, is there an additional sort of level of work and responsibility placed on the teacher? I think yes, in tracking and documenting where kids are in their learning. But I think what you saw from the research, that's what we need to do to have the highest impact on learning. I really appreciate your questions, but I do want to make sure that we all have an opportunity to give our feedback. We can just take 5 or 10 minutes for this, and then we can come back and I can try and take some quick questions afterwards. Well, there'll probably be quick questions, but we'll do our best, and then we all can try and have this time
Just
for
going to move around, stretch for a
Yeah.
moment. So just, if you go put your post-its up, as soon as everybody's seated, go to the questions. We're not